If you would, give a huge, huge warm welcome to ex-McKinsey guy, Kion Krippendorf. Kion.
Thanks, Vern. Thanks. Great. So I thought I'd start with a story rather than an introduction. In 240 BC, in China, a general was asked by an emperor to quell a rebellion on the other side of the kingdom. So he gathered 50,000 men, and he began marching to where this rebellion was. And he came across a river, and he looked across the river, and he saw waiting for him on the other side 100,000 rebel forces. So he thought, what should I do? And he did what you might do, gather your team together and analyze their options. And they said, we have three options. The first option is, well, we can go home and we can tell the emperor that we failed the emperor, right? But in 240 BC, the consequences of failing the emperor are death, right? So we hope this is the suboptimal option. Let's keep looking. Next option is we can wait here until the rebels leave and then cross the river, but by then the rebellion will be over. Nevertheless, we'll have failed the emperor. And McKinsey, they taught us to break our options down into mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive sets of options. So, mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive would say I can go home, I can stay, or I can cross. So my final option is to cross the river and attack the adversary on the other side. There are several reasons why this is a bad idea. It might be our best idea. There are several tactical reasons why this is a bad idea. The first is that they outnumber us 2-1, right? The second is that when we get to the other side of the river, we're going to be fighting uphill, and they're going to be fighting downhill at us. They have gravity working in their favor. The third is that they're on the defensive, we're on the offensive. A defensive position is almost always superior to an offensive position. And the third is that we lack freedom of movement. We're wading through water, and they have terrain behind them around which to maneuver. So I'd like you to think about what you would do in this situation. I know some people here have heard me tell this story before, don't share the answer. But I'd like you to think about what you would do in this situation. I'll describe to you what the general did, and to see if you can come up with the option that he came up with, because obviously my point is that he didn't choose from these three options. He ordered his men to build sandbags and put them upriver. He waited for the water to drain out of the river, and then ordered his men to cross. So that's a creative move. I certainly wouldn't have thought of that. But I definitely wouldn't have thought about what he did next, which is after he engaged his adversary, he orders men to retreat. And they ran back to his side of the river. And the rebel leader, of course, follows. He sees his adversary retreating. He orders his men to charge after him. And the general waits for 50,000 rebel forces to get to his side of the river. Waits, and 50,000 rebel forces are wading through the water to get to him, and then he releases the dam. Washes away 50,000 rebels, then orders men to turn around and fight again, and he's completely transformed his situation. Before he was outnumbered 2-1, now he's 1-1. Before he was fighting uphill, now he's fighting downhill. Before he was on the offensive, now he's on the defensive. Defensive position is almost always superior. And before he lacked freedom of movement, now he has terrain to move around in while his adversary's backed up against the river. So by conceiving of this fourth option, he transformed an impossible situation into one that he could actually win. And that's what I want to talk about today, is how do you conceive of these fourth options? Because I think that is the fundamental source of advantage. That's the beginning of competitive advantage. If you study history's most successful military strategists, you'll see that's the one thing they share in common, is an ability to see a fourth option on the battlefield when their adversaries only see three. So the question is, what stops us from seeing fourth options? Is there a fourth option available to you that you just haven't thought of yet? And I'd like to introduce you to a methodology and go through an exercise that will help start teasing out these fourth options, and maybe you'll walk out of here with a fourth option that'll help you win whatever you're playing with greater ease. Because this is true in war, but it's also true in chess, it's true in sports on the football field, and it's also true in business. As Vern mentioned, my last piece of research, which I've recently completed, involved identifying what I think are the 100 most competitive companies of the decade. So I've taken this universe of 7,000 publicly traded companies, and I've distilled them down to a list of 100 who generate, over that course of 10 years, from 1995 to 2005, the highest average revenue growth rate. That's the red circle on the top. At the same time, the highest profit margin, which is that green circle, EBITDA margin. At the same time, the highest total return to shareholders. And if you can find a company that outperforms its competition on all three, then here in the center, you have these 100 companies. And if you study how these companies grew and overtook their competition, like Nokia in 1995 was 1/10 the size of Motorola, and today is larger than Motorola. How did Nokia overtake Motorola? If you study Nokia's history or Microsoft's history or Dell's history, you'll start to see a systematic pattern. As an example, let's look at Microsoft. Many people say you can't compete with Microsoft. In fact, there's a legal question about whether you can compete with Microsoft. Right? And if you ask an academic why, to explain this wall that Microsoft has built around it, they'll say, well, it's obvious. You can't compete with Microsoft. Microsoft has attained a sustainable competitive advantage. You can't compete with Microsoft. But what that doesn't explain is what happened. What did Microsoft do to build the wall? What happened when Microsoft was smaller than Apple? Or when Microsoft is smaller than your company is today? What did Microsoft do when it was smaller than your company is today to start building this wall? And it'll be the same pattern that if you go back and follow Dell's history, you'll see the same thing. You conceive of something your competitors don't conceive. If it's the right idea, it'll be something that your competitors also won't consider. They won't consider doing it. And if it's the right idea, it'll also be something that they choose not to do. And your competitors will choose not to compete and choose not to compete and choose not to compete with you long enough that you can build this fourth level of the wall and do something your competitors can't do. But it always begins with conceiving of something that your competitors won't choose to copy. In other words, it's great if you can do something your competitors can't do. That's great. But it is enough. It is enough if they just choose not to copy and choose not to fight with you, right? That's enough. Dell originally conceived of selling computers directly to consumers, and that was something that its larger competitors, who at the early stages probably could have snuffed out Dell, they chose not to resist. A brilliant strategy. Starbucks conceives of the third place. University of Phoenix, the largest public university in the United States, conceives first of educating adults when everyone was educating recent high school graduates. Whole Foods. Well, let's go a little bit deeper into Whole Foods, because Whole Foods points out to another thing. It's not just one example. There's always a simple answer to why a company beats its competitor, but it's usually more complex than that. So you could say Whole Foods, which is this fast-growing, they're growing at about 30% a year. They're generating about 10% EBITDA margins, which is about twice that of the industry average. And they're growing faster than their competitors. They're now one of the largest grocery store chains, depending on how you count, the fifth or ninth largest in the States. And you could say, well, the reason that they're growing so quickly is that they've targeted a different market. They sell these very high-end natural foods that Kroger and traditional grocery store chains wouldn't sell, right? Now, play a little game with me, okay? Pretend that you're the CEO of Kroger. And you're trying to decide how you're going to react to Whole Foods, because you know Whole Foods has something's working for Whole Foods. And so what do I want to do as the CEO of Kroger? I want to copy their strategy. I can probably create a separate brand that would, I can try to start selling products out of the mass market, selling these high-end products. I can probably introduce that, and Kroger's doing that. Executive salary cap. The CEO of Whole Foods can only earn 8 times the average salary of the average employee. Now, you're the CEO of Kroger. You jump on that idea? No. How about this? Let's give each store its own P&L and independence. Let's share that P&L information, the second to last bullet, share that detailed performance data with all employees so that every employee in Whole Foods knows what the profit and loss was for their store that month and how that compares to the Whole Foods across the street or in Dallas or wherever. Do you know every one of Whole Foods employees is deemed an insider by the SEC because they have that level of financial information? Now again, the CEO of Kroger, is he going to jump at the opportunity to share that information with his food baggers? No. And that allows us to spur interstore competition. So, it's a set of interlocking winning moves or fourth options that cause your competitor to let you walk in the door. Will this strategy last forever? I don't know. It doesn't really matter. But if it lasts for 10 years or 20 years, then you have a potential to build the fourth level of the wall. Urban Outfitters, I interviewed the CEO of Urban Outfitters recently. Amazing store. How many people have been to an Urban Outfitters or an Anthropologie? Just so I get a sense of, really great. That's more than I thought. So, really exciting environment to go shopping in. They sell apparel to college students primarily. And if you ask the CEO of Urban Outfitters to explain what his competitive advantage is, he doesn't describe the usual stuff. He doesn't describe his product assortment or his store experience. He starts with saying, I hire people that the Gap wouldn't hire. I hire people that come to me and they don't have a college degree and they're not very analytical. They might come to me with ripped jeans, but you know what they're really good at is they know how to look at a room. They could look at this room and they could figure out how to make this room really look spectacular. They're artists. And because I hire those people, I'm allowed to give them unprecedented freedom to design their own stores. You know, if you are a manager at an Urban Outfitters and you're at home and you see a old crate in your living room and you think, hey, that would look really great in the men's section. You can bring that crate to work and you can put it in the men's section and make that part of the display. And the Gap would never allow that, right? They also remove a store manager layer from the organization. They sell used clothing along with their new clothing, and they have a very complex distribution network. So it is about price and assortment and things, but it's also about putting together a set of winning moves that your competitors will choose not to defend against. So what I want to do is, I want to show you today that the way you beat your competition is by outthinking the competition, by coming up with a set of strategies like the ones I described. I want to provide you with a set of 36 moves, a playbook, an ancient playbook that you can use to come up with these winning moves. Then we're going to go deep into 10 of the most powerful winning moves, based on my research, the most commonly used that are useful for overtaking the competition. And then we're going to close by talking a little bit about how to turn the ideas that you create into action. And this methodology is simple, but it really works. I ran into a client of mine a couple months ago, and we had worked with him three years prior. And he went through the same methodology we're going to go through today in the next 90 minutes. Which is he got his team together. You might be sitting with your team. He stated a challenge. We're not growing, or we want to grow. He looked at his challenge through 10 winning moves, 10 stratagems, which we're going to do. They came up with 150 ideas. They distilled it down to 5 ideas, and one of those ideas was the silver bullet. See, they asked themselves, what bricks could we give away? Seems like an odd question. We're going to ask that question ourselves. But by asking what bricks could we give away, they looked at a part of the problem that they wouldn't have looked at before, that came up with an idea that turned into a product that engaged their partners and in a way that no one else had, and they tripled their revenue in over 3 years from that one idea. So hopefully also you'll walk out with the beginning of such an idea. That's my aspiration for today. But before I go into the winning moves, I just need to shift your perspective on competition a little bit, because when companies come to us and we help develop strategies, we find that there are 2 perspectives that we have on strategy that tend to hide our ability or prevent us from seeing winning moves. The first is that we love to focus on physical competition rather than mental competition, and the other is that we love to focus on logic rather than moves. So I'm just going to touch a little bit on each of these, then we're going to go into the playbook and go into the moves. Physical versus mental competition. Do you understand the importance of shifting your focus from physical competition to mental competition? You have to know John Boyd. Who here has heard of John Boyd? Curious to see. 2 or 3. Yeah, not many people. I think John Boyd is he's a modern-day Sun Tzu. He's now deceased, but he's the modern-day Sun Tzu. He's the greatest strategist of modern times, in my view. He was a retired, as I said, now deceased U.S. Air Force pilot, and he was known as the 40-second Boyd because he had a running bet his entire life that if he got into air with you within 40 seconds, he would have you locked in his sights. He never lost his bet. In the Korean War, he flew F-86s against MiGs. And F-86s are inferior to MiGs in several key dimensions. They have lower firepower, they have less thrust, and they don't protect their pilot as well as a MiG does. And yet he trained his pilots. He was the tactical trainer for his squadron. He trained his squadron to achieve a 15-to-1 kill ratio against MiGs. So even though they were flying inferior machinery, for every plane they lost, they shot down 15 enemy planes. So they asked him, after he retired, to explain how he became such a great pilot and how he trained other people to become great pilots. And what he said was the answer is the answer to this riddle. To understand his answer, we've got to play a little riddle. So I'm going to ask you to play a little game with me. And I'm going to describe, again, if you've seen any of my workshops or presentations before, you've seen this before, so please don't participate. But at your tables, I'd like you to just see if you can see what the fourth scene is here. I'm going to describe 3 scenes to you. I'm going to take an element out of each scene and just see if you can see what the next scene is. And if you see it, just call it out. So I'm going to describe these 3 things. I'm going to say piece out of this, piece out of this, put it together. And if you see elephant, just say elephant. We're just going to see who can see the next scene first. So ski scene. Imagine a ski scene. Slopes, skiers, trees. Right, I need you to imagine the ski scene. Now, imagine a little boy playing with a toy tank, and he's outside in a sandbox playing by himself, and there are little plastic soldiers around him. Now, forget that scene and go to a bicycle scene. Let's do the Tour de France with a team of bicyclers dressed up with yellow jersey, and they're riding road bikes. 3 distinct scenes. I'm going to take an element out of each one, put them together, and if you see what the next scene is, just call it out. Take the skis from the ski scene, the treads off the little boy's toy tank, the handlebars from the bicycle, snowmobile. Exactly, snowmobile. See, what you want your competitors to do is to not see snowmobiles. That's what John Boyd said. He said, I train my people to cycle through what he calls the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, and act. They cycle through the OODA loop faster than the competition, so they're on the snowmobile going on to the next match while their competitions are trying to figure out, what do I do with these pieces? And they get ahead and ahead with each time they cycle until the lag time between what is happening and what their competitors know is happening becomes so great that their competitors fall apart. It's a little bit like using an old computer. You click and you know what's going to happen next, so you click ahead and you click ahead and you click ahead. Eventually the computer gets so far behind it crashes. So I just get my adversaries to crash like a computer. That's what John Boyd might say. What he's describing is that you play above the physical level. You play on the mental level. In fact, he said that there are 3 levels to competition. And this is true in war, but it's also true in business. He said there's the physical level, which we focus on and we can see. How big my gun is compared to your gun. And going head-to-head with the competition. But above that, and more important than that, is the mental level. What I perceive and what they perceive. And above that, there is the moral level, which we're not going to talk much about here, but that has to do with your mission, vision, values. And Dell's focus on being the first technology company that's carbon neutral would be an example of moral competition. So he's describing focusing on the mental level, not the physical level. It's the same thing that Sun Tzu's been saying for 3,000 years through his writings. He wrote, "The highest form of generalship is to balk the enemy's plans. The next best is to prevent the junction of the enemy's forces in order to prevent them from, in other words, prevent them from organizing. Those are mental competition. The next in order is to attack the enemy's army in field, which is to go head-to-head against an equal competitor. The worst policy of all is to besiege walled cities. In other words, the first two are mental, the bottom two are physical. It's better to win a mental war because you can win it with less bloodshed, with less effort. So that's the physical versus mental. I'd like you to focus on the mental level of competition rather than physical level. The second barrier is logic. So I'm going to talk a little bit about logic, and then we're going to go into the moves. Every strategic game has distinct phases. There's an opening and there's an end game. In the end game, you can use logic because there are few pieces on the puzzle, but in the opening, logic falls apart. It's useless in openings. But our strategic methodologies almost exclusively are based on logic. You could take most of our strategic methodologies and you can group them into either option narrowing or rules. Option narrowing means laying out your options and distilling and narrowing them down till you come up with the optimal option. Rules are studying great companies, great leaders, distilling from them the 7 habits, the 21 laws, the best practices. And these are absolutely essential to running a business well. I'm not saying we should abandon them, but they work in end games. They don't work in openings. They're not going to give you that exciting fourth option. They're not going to tell you to cross the river, put up a dam, and come back and release the dam. Instead, if we ask creative people how they create, they'll describe something like Albert Einstein describes, certain building blocks, certain signs or images that he reproduces and recombines. In other words, we're pattern recognition machines. We heard a little bit about this yesterday. You know this intuitively because when you face a problem in your company, you don't ask, what do the 7 rules tell me, or what are my options, and what's my optimal option? You say, what does this remind me of? And you say, oh, this reminds me of a time 3 years ago in my company when I faced a similar situation, and we did X, Y, Z. We lured them onto our side, we released the dam, and we turned around and we fought. Let's try that same thing. That's just how we think. So winning is not about using logic. It's about the size of your playbook, not the quality of your logic. The difference between a master chess player and an expert chess player is that a master chess player knows twice as many patterns as an expert chess player. The difference between a grandmaster chess player and a master chess player is that a grandmaster knows 5 times as many patterns as a master chess player. All you have to do to start thinking this way is add new plays to your playbook. So we're just going to add new plays to your playbook. We don't like adding plays to our playbook because we like our playbook the way it is. When I go traveling, for example, I arrive in a city, I rent a car. It's always a Hertz so that I can get the never lost system so I don't have to think, right? And I start driving, and I start playing with the radio, and I use the seek button a lot, and I find some really great music that I haven't heard in a long time. But then I find a station that I like, and I program that as 1. Then I keep seeking, and I program 2, seek 3, seek 4, and when I've hit 5 and I've filled up my numbers, I stop seeking. I keep going back to the same numbers over and over and again because they, for the most part, give me a pretty good answer. And that's how we are. That's the difference between experts and novices. Like Tiger Woods, you could say, simply keeps going back. He goes back and he learns more patterns and more patterns where the rest of us stop with 5. So all we're going to do is stock your reservoir with more patterns, and you'll be able to start seeing new options. So if it's about increasing your playbook, what's the playbook we're going to use? I'm going to